The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
So there's a kind of parallel story now going on in addition to the investigation into the death of this journalist from the Washington Post, Jamal Khashoggi, at the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, Turkey. And it relates to the seeming reluctance of the Trump White House to just fully say what seems to be very obviously the reality here, which is that Saudi Arabia was at minimum directly involved and likely specifically responsible for the death of this journalist. And we actually have a poll up on the David Pakman Show YouTube channel community tab at youtube.com/The David Pakman Show/community, asking you why you think we are seeing this reluctance from Trump to just really say what everybody else is thinking about it. And there's a sort of lying and optional lying, unforced error story that's developing as well, which is that Donald Trump has chosen to straight up deny that he has any financial interests in Saudi Arabia. The problem primarily is that he previously bragged about these financial interests that he now denies having, and it's all related to the death of journalist Jamal Khashoggi. Yesterday, we were wondering about what would the White House's response be to the killing of Jamal Khashoggi by, as far as we've most recently surmised, Saudi Arabian interrogators inside the Saudi embassy in Istanbul, Turkey. And part of the skepticism that Trump would do anything serious about it came from his sort of bizarre parroting of this talking point that anybody could have killed Khashoggi. It could have been, quote, rogue killers. And then part of our skepticism about Trump doing a damn thing about this came from his general attitude towards authoritarian dictators during his presidency and towards violent theocracies, which is that he seems to be, quite frankly, pretty impressed with them and usually doesn't criticize them very much. But there is a third angle that should really make us particularly skeptical of Trump's handling of the death in a serious manner, which is the issue of Donald Trump's financial interests in Saudi Arabia, but also with Saudi individuals. And apparently, to try to sort of get ahead of this, Donald Trump tweeted yesterday that, quote, "For the record, I have no financial interest in Saudi Arabia, or Russia for that matter." I mean, why not mention that while you're at it? "Any suggestion that I have is just more fake news, of which there is plenty." Of course, not only is this a known, provable lie, Trump himself previously bragged about doing business with the Saudis. Here's just one of many, many examples I could play for you.
We need to make great deals with other countries. Saudi Arabia, I like the Saudis. They're very nice. I make a lot of money with them. They buy all sorts of my stuff, all kinds of toys from Trump. They pay me millions and hundreds of millions. But you know what? They make $1 billion a day, folks.
There are a ton of these. I won't bore you with them, but many of these instances where Trump says, I sell stuff to the Saudis, I do business with the Saudis, it's all great. When Trump first announced his bid for the White House in Trump Tower in New York in 2015, he said, I love the Saudis. Many are in this building. Trump has tons of deals with the Saudis. Trump World Tower sold a building to the Saudi government. Trump bought a yacht originally built for a Saudi arms dealer who happens to be the cousin of Jamal Khashoggi. That's a connection that maybe we will talk more about. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has been staying at Trump's hotel on the west side of Manhattan while Trump has been president of the United States. There's a Saudi billionaire who bought a yacht from Trump in 1991 for $20 million, timed, by the way, to help Donald Trump stave off personal bankruptcy. It's a very long list. So as usual, Trump is lying. That's not new. But what's significant is that now it's Russia. Now it's also Saudi Arabia, where Trump's personal connections to rich people in the countries could directly influence how Trump handles geopolitics and American policy related to these countries. In this case, we're talking about the reaction to the killing of Washington Post journalist Jamal Khashoggi. It's gone beyond pathological lies. And I was thinking yesterday, Pat, wouldn't it sort of be smarter and more realistic, instead of lying and saying, I have no financial involvement with the Saudis, right? What if Trump said, I have financial ties to people all over the world because I'm a successful business person, but I'm the president now, and I'm not going to let that influence my decisions. Like, wouldn't that be, it would still not be believable, but at least it's not a demonstrable lie.
That's what someone rational would do. But you could go many steps beyond that, like Trump could divest from his businesses and put his assets into a blind trust. So even if at one time he had ties to the Saudis, he would no longer be influenced by that. He would no longer have a conflict of interest. And you could go beyond that too and release your tax returns. But that's a little pie in the sky at this point.
There were actually Trumpists on the internet defending the letter of what Trump said by arguing that to Donald Trump, the definition of financial ties might just be something different than the list of what I told you, selling yachts, selling stuff to the Saudi government in his buildings. All maybe to Trump, it's technically what he believes, so it's not a lie. It's a semantic disagreement. Is that really the best that you can do to try to argue that Donald Trump is not lying here? The Saudi financial thing is really serious. And Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman previously said, we covered this, it might have been July, I don't remember exactly. Mohammed bin Salman previously said that he has Donald Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, in his pocket. Okay, This is not without precedent. We've already been concerned about this. And what I want to hear from you about, and you can vote on this on our YouTube community poll, what do you think is the primary driver of this reluctance from Trump to really go after Saudi Arabia here? YouTube.com/The David Pakman Show/community. And you can vote there. Maybe we will have results in a few days on an upcoming show. Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell is now hinting at fixing the deficit problem that Trump and his own cronies, Republican cronies' tax cuts caused by hinting at cutting Medicare and cutting Medicaid and cutting Social Security. So yesterday we talked about the budget deficit. The budget deficit is up 17% in fiscal year 2018 over fiscal year 2017. The budget deficit is set to continue climbing and climbing into 2019 and 2020. Donald Trump claimed during the campaign that he would reduce the deficit, that he would start paying off the national debt. But instead, we've had this combination of corporate tax cuts and even more military spending, if you can believe that, which are leading to deficit growth. I won't repeat it all again since I did it yesterday, but we now understand that this entire debt deficit thing is a political football. Republicans don't actually care about the deficit. They use the deficit to slam Democrats, but every recent Republican president has blown up the deficit. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell told us last year that we wouldn't need to cut anything to pay for the tax cuts that they signed into law because the tax cuts would pay for themselves. What do they mean by that? It's important to understand when they say the tax cuts will pay for themselves, what they mean is even though the tax cuts reduce tax revenue, they will stimulate the economy to such a degree that there will be so much new tax revenue as a result of businesses just doing so well and people earning more money, whatever, that as the name suggests, the tax cuts would pay for themselves by generating new tax revenue. We know it's not happening. We knew it wasn't going to happen. And in fact, the deficit is climbing and climbing. We now have an idea from Mitch McConnell about how to fix it. And what he's hinting at is to cut Medicare and to cut Medicaid and to cut Social Security. He actually told Bloomberg News yesterday that the reason the deficit is up, it's not because they cut taxes on business. It's not because they're spending more on the military. Mitch McConnell told Bloomberg that the deficit is up because they can't get Democrats to agree to a deal to contain the spending on Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, which is a direct hint at we could maybe fix it if we cut that stuff. And in a sense, we could say it's a victory that McConnell's even admitting the deficit is up. Oftentimes, Republicans, when faced with the fact that the deficit is growing, they will just claim it's not. They will basically bury their heads in the sand. He said it's disappointing, but it's not a Republican problem. Of course, how could it possibly be a Republican problem?
For 2 years now, we've been talking about how the Trump administration and Republicans right now are coming up with solutions that don't work for problems that don't exist.
Yes.
This is a little different. This is horrific solutions for problems that they created.
That's exactly
They've been
right.
wanting to do this all along.
And I've got to hand it to Democrats. I mean, Democrats, along with tons of other people, predicted that Republicans would pass a bill that increases the deficit and then they would claim to be furious about the fact that the deficit is up, blame Democrats, and then suggest cutting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security to fix it. And it's exactly what they're doing, right? And exactly as I used to say, so I used to call it solutions that don't work to problems that don't exist. And I agree with you. Solutions that don't work to problems that you created is the evil genius, in a sense, of what's going on here. They won't do it right before the midterms. They don't want to risk putting off seniors who vote and poor people who vote as well, and people who are retired who vote as well. But right after the midterms, they will start saying, listen, we've got to get serious about this deficit. The president has done his part. No, he hasn't. It's Democrats who won't allow us now to balance the budget. And then in time for the 2020 election, they'll come up with something new to distract from the fact that they either tried to or potentially successfully cut those programs.
Right. Medicare and Social Security are overwhelmingly the most popular programs in the country. So they won't do it ahead of the midterms. But regardless of if they lose the House and Senate, they'll try to push for it after the midterms, either during the lame duck period or if they retain control, knowing that they have 2 years to do whatever they want.
That's right. If they're losing control of the House and or Senate, they will try to push it through in lame duck and then do like symbolic attempts to get it through, sort of like the 60-something that they did to try to repeal Obamacare, when they obviously weren't going to because the House was controlled by Democrats under President Obama. But eventually they will have to move on to something else and claim that they did their part. It was Democrats. Democrats will be the problem no matter what, either because they prevented Republicans from, quote, balancing the budget, or because they're responsible for the deficit having increased.
You'd think the problem would be the military spending increases, or maybe the tax cuts, reducing the government's revenue, but apparently that's not the problem.
And it works out great. Like, think about if you're Mitch McConnell. Kentucky, his state, is one of the biggest takers when it comes to taking federal money versus paying money back into the system that's distributed out to the states. Kentucky is the real welfare queen, right? Referencing Ronald Reagan's story about some woman with who knows how many kids who drove a Cadillac and was on welfare. Didn't exist. The real welfare queen, quote unquote, is actually a red state like Kentucky, and it's all going to work out fantastically well for Mitch McConnell. People need to vote is the conclusion, and I want to hear from you about this. I want to hear from you about if you're voting early, which starts very soon, and as soon as in a couple days in some states. I'm on Twitter at @dpacman, and the show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show. Follow us both and let me know what's going on with your voting plan.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Hey, let me take a second here, if I may, Pat, just to say thanks to a couple of important people. Brian Dean is today's new member of the day. Brian's awesome. We depend on the support of members. We depend on the support of patrons. And Brian has signed up at www.joinpakman.com and is a great person.
Maybe Brian Dean will one day become a sustaining member of the day. That's the goal.
And today's sustaining member of the day, you're not just chopped liver if you have been a member for a while and it's already beyond when you were a new member of the day. Nuris Quintana is today's sustaining member of the day, who has been with us since September of 2013, more than 5 years. 5 years. Thanks to both of you. Join them at www.joinpakman.com. Patronage is also available. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. $1 a month might not sound like much, but when thousands of people do it, it starts to add up. Patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Okay, there's been a lot of controversy recently over the use of certain vocabulary words in the political world of politics, partially as a result of the debasement coming from Donald Trump's presidency. That is sort of what today's Hatriot Mail deals with. But before that, Hatriot Mail. What is Hatriot Mail? This is Hatriot Mail.
Brace yourselves for the only information that can successfully penetrate a tinfoil hat.
Right.
Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
Yeah, so last week I gave sort of a lengthier than usual introduction to Hatriot Mail. This week's Hatriot Mail not only requires no introduction, it deserves no introduction.
Unsubbed, you cuck. Go ahead and vote for Hilary, you sellout cuck. Pac-Man is a cuck for the hashtag faux progressive movement. Parkman probably shaves his and then wonders why Dems keep losing. How tall is David Pac-Man anyway? This is what happens on the soy diet. Ingots fellatio.
Ingots fellatio. Ingots.
What does that mean?
I have no idea.
What's ingots?
I couldn't. I mean, it's not for people who are listening. It's not ingot, which is a word, right? An ingot. It's ingits. It's very strange. Now, most of this requires no response and really deserves none. Requires no introduction nor response. But I want to point out one thing. The vegan here is Pat, and he's way taller than me. It seems not to have influenced your height.
Well, at the time I was growing, I wasn't vegan, so maybe it does.
Maybe they are onto something.
Maybe it does.
Maybe they aren't.
But I don't think he was ever subscribed. He said, "Unsubbed, you cuck." At
Yeah.
what point did this guy decide to unsubscribe?
We've
There's
talked
no
about
way.
unsubscribed trolls who, every time we say something they don't like, they very loudly pronounce that they are unsubscribing. How many times have you resubscribed such that you were able to unsubscribe 10 times, right? Like,
Yeah.
are you unsubscribing and resubscribing endlessly? It's very weird.
Only now does he realize that you're a cuck and a soy boy and a shill for Hillary? I mean, come on. You could see that coming years apart.
I like a good miso soup, but beyond that, I don't really have high soy consumption in my diet.
I have a lot of soy.
You do?
I do.
Pat
I'm a soy
is
boy. I'm a
literally
proud soy boy.
Yeah, you are, yeah. We could call you a B12 soy boy.
Yes.
I think that's a fair name. Okay, Hatriot 40 is a coupon code. B12 soy boy. What are we talking about? It throws off the rails.
I embrace
today.
it.
Cut all of this out from the edit before we send it out. Hatriot 40 will save you 40% off of your membership. Memberships are great because they not only support us. Hatriots cry when you get a membership. Okay. Let's talk about something very, very serious. And it's hard to even know how to enter this story because there's been so much swirling around it. But let me sort of lay out what's going on in Nevada for you. We are days from early voting starting in many states. Nevada's one of those states. In Nevada, there is a Trump-endorsed Republican Senate candidate named Adam Laxalt, who's running against Democratic candidate Steve Sisolak. Laxalt, we've actually mentioned before, he's the guy whose family is actually advocating against him and wants the Democrat to win. Donald Trump gave a very strong endorsement of Adam Laxalt. You might remember when Trump tweeted, "I strongly endorse Adam Laxalt for governor of Nevada. Adam is smart," and I might have said Senate, but it's governor if I misspoke. Now I'm not sure. "Adam is smart, works hard, and knows how to win. He will be a great governor, also will fight hard to lower your taxes, and is tough on crime." I have huge breaking news today that I am personally privy to and have been working on for the last 3 or 4 days. Adam Laxalt allegedly raped a woman who I've spoken to personally on the phone, okay? We have a contact on the ground in Las Vegas, a journalist I've worked with off and on various stories over the years. He started researching Adam Laxalt's history and got in touch with different people that were living in New Orleans, Louisiana, when Adam Laxalt was at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. And this journalist eventually got in touch with a woman who worked in the restaurant industry at the time, who says straight up that Adam Laxalt raped her. The details involve a night out and following her home and inviting himself into her home. The victim has been interviewed by the local CBS station, CBS 8 in Las Vegas, a while ago, and the story hasn't been run. And this is as much a part of the story as the alleged rape itself. Why has CBS 8 not run the story? I've been in touch with the journalist and with the victim, and I've been waiting for the story to be run, thinking the election is soon. Early voting is soon. I'm sure they are going to run the story, right? Well, we've now learned that CBS 8 is sitting on the story. They filmed the interview because, according to reporter Vanessa Murphy, as far as I've been told, she was told by her superiors to sit on the story without running it for the time being. It has been relayed to me that a local ABC affiliate reached out to the Laxalt campaign for comment yesterday afternoon. As of right now, the Laxalt campaign has not said anything about the allegations. I am told that the Bayou Brief, is it Bayou? Bayou Brief. Sorry, excuse me. English is my second language, forgive me. The Bayou Brief has interviewed the victim, but most importantly, I spoke to the victim in detail about the incident and the entire story. And my impression is that she is totally and completely credible. I have no reason whatsoever to doubt her based on my conversation with her, which was extensive about all of the details here. That being said, She is not someone who is a skilled interviewee. And she told me this. She told me that she was extraordinarily anxious and distraught during that CBS interview, which has not yet aired. There is no question that interviewing her in the way that any responsible journalist would interview her, as I would if I had her on the program, it would be a really re-traumatizing thing for her to be interviewed. If I interview her, I have to do it a certain way. And right now, I've not asked her to appear on the show. She would appear on the show, but as of now, I've not asked her to. She may appear, and we may determine that that's the path forward. But right now, we have to get this story out there. It is time to put pressure on the Laxalt campaign to respond, to say something as the number of news articles and demands for comment grow, and to point out that there are very serious allegations here, that they are being ignored by at least one corporate media station after they've done an extensive interview because of an editorial decision. I've spoken to the victim, who for the time being I'm going to identify as Danielle P. We've been going back and forth about whether to use her full name or not. I think the full name at some point is going to be out there. I don't necessarily want to be the first one to put the name out there, but Danielle P. is how I'm identifying her for the time being. We've got to put pressure on CBS 8 to run the story. We've got to put pressure on the Laxalt campaign to comment. And we need other media outlets to pick the story up. So what we're doing on the YouTube clip for this story is we're linking to the 2 or 3 stories that have been written so far about this. And we've got to put more pressure on this, because this is yet another person. Early voting's about to start. The full election is just a couple of weeks away. And there may be yet another sexual assaulter, sexual predator, who is about to be put into an important position in American government. Not a position for life like Brett Kavanaugh on the Supreme Court, but a position that is it's one of 50 state governorships, which are of incredible power and importance. And the story has to get out there. So that's where we are right now. And I will update the story as more happens. I will remain in touch with the victim about whether we think it makes sense for her to do an interview on the show or not. And I would be interested in that, but I've sort of explained my hesitations. I don't want to be responsible for re-traumatizing someone if the story, in any case, is going to be completely ignored. And there are corporate media entities ignoring it right now as we speak. We will follow it and have more for you as news breaks and as more comes up. Make sure you are following The David Pakman Show on Instagram for the latest updates about this and other stories at David Pakman Show. You can also follow me on Instagram at david.pakman. I will be at Politicon over the weekend. I will be posting pictures, and they will be posted to my Instagram account, david.pakman, and to the shows at David Pakman Show. Let's take a quick break. Coming up next, my interview with Hilary Bricken, a cannabis attorney, and we will discuss many important things going on in the world of legalization, decriminalization, recreational marijuana businesses, bank accounts, cash. The entire gamut of stories and topics will be discussed with Hilary right after the break.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
It's great to be joined today by Hilary Bricken, who's an attorney at Harris Bricken, focusing on the corporate, transactional, and regulatory side of the state legal marijuana industry on the West Coast of the United States. Hilary, it's great to talk to you. I think, even in your introduction, we said the state legal marijuana industry. How is the fact that marijuana is still illegal at the federal level impacting what is happening within states that have both decriminalized and legalized?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. To the immediate answer, it messes them up on a daily basis, maybe even sometimes an hourly basis, because even though we have these more liberal, really drug reform regimes that have now taken the form of licensing and taxation and regulation, we still have to grapple every day with this federal conflict. And it affects everything from taxation on the federal level to your ability to get a bank account, to your ability to protect your intellectual property on the federal level. And even these more obscure agencies like the Bureau of Reclamation and the Postmaster of the United States have taken positions that are anti-cannabis business, anti-cannabis entrepreneur, even ancillary companies that support the industry, let's say through real estate or equipment, other goods and services. They can find themselves in a very precarious position because they are aiding and abetting under federal law, which is a crime, people who are engaged in illegal drug trafficking, and that includes charges of conspiracy. So even on the ancillary level, on just the supporting level, they too find themselves hitting business roadblocks because of the feds and the current position that our country takes on cannabis, whether it's medical or not.
So during the Obama administration, correct me if I'm wrong, there was a sort of decision made that even though marijuana was illegal federally, that the Justice Department was not going to sort of proactively focus on marijuana businesses in states that had either decriminalized or legalized, and sort of said, we will let the states enforce the law as it exists there. But that is a decision that, of course, can change at any time. The current Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, has a sort of different perspective on marijuana. So what do you, does that come up when you're working with businesses that are in this industry? How much do you talk about the fact that if the federal government wanted, what is legal for you to do based on state law could cause you major problems federally? Like, is that a conversation? Is that something your clients are thinking about and planning for?
We talk about it often, and we represent a smattering of clientele from investors who are purely interested in a money play or an exit play. We represent legacy operators that actually want to compete and they actually traffic. We represent tech companies and landlords, again, that support the industry. We all talk about it, really dependent upon each individual or each individual company's risk profile. So you mentioned what happened under the Obama administration when Eric Holder was the U.S. Attorney General. A memo issued basically from the Department of Justice from the top down, essentially with your U.S. Attorney General, deputy U.S. Attorney Generals telling other U.S. attorneys how to do their jobs in states that have state legal cannabis, because it can also be very confusing to them about where to enforce, how much money and resources to throw at those kinds of cases. That happened back in 2013, the one that you mentioned, about being hands-off, right after Washington and Colorado legalized on the state level. Then this year, new Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who probably, I think, has a personal beef with cannabis. He's gone on record saying some very interesting things about how he personally feels about it.
Yep.
He actually rescinded all of the U.S. Attorney General guidelines and memos to date that touched on any kind of clarity relative to how the feds would treat cannabis. So now essentially what we have is a bit of a free-for-all. Those memos, even the Sessions memo, it is one page, and if anybody hasn't read it, they should. It doesn't do anything to change the Controlled Substances Act. It's not meant for you and me to help us navigate these very murky waters. It's for U.S. attorneys by U.S. attorneys on how to do their jobs. What has happened, though, this wrinkle from Sessions, is that essentially he's told these U.S. attorneys, you have always had individual U.S. prosecutorial discretion. You can choose to bring whatever cases you want in your district based on the time, money, resources, and priorities that you're recognizing within your borders as important to you and your office. So I'm in California, I'm in Los Angeles. We have 4 U.S. attorneys. That's a lot of U.S. attorneys for one state, where literally from district to district, which changes by city or county, right, federal district, you could have a different U.S. attorney on enforcing on a different level. So when I speak to my clients, we do talk about the overall impact and the fact that at any time the U.S. government can come in, sweep them out, indict them, take them to prison. They literally have no defense. That's always been the case. But now it's even more unclear because an individual U.S. attorney could prioritize state legal operating businesses. Now, none of them have done that to date, but we're beginning to see murmurings that some of them are not so happy with the way some of these state programs have been put together because they're too loose on regulation. There's diversion of product out of state and out of the country, and it flies in the face of the Controlled Substances Act. So again, we're in a really kind of confusing time, basically because Jeff Sessions rescinded that previous guidance that really set the mark for what you needed to do as a state and what you needed to do as a cannabis business to better ensure that the feds did not make a priority out of you.
Within the legal community, is there any stigma associated with being an attorney that works on cannabis-related issues? Like, is it seen as Oh, look at what's going on over there. We're focusing on marijuana. Like, is there any internal stigma, or is it just sort of like, it's an area of focus just like any other?
When I first started about 8 years ago, absolutely communal legal stigma. Some lawyers can be pretty righteous, and the fact that this violates federal law really does bring into question whether or not you're complying with your state's ethics rules. Are you implicated in violations of federal law? And more conservative lawyers at certain firms want nothing to do with it, and they don't want to interact with or respect the attorneys that have anything to do with it. Now, as years have gone on, certainly the practice has commanded more respect because the clients that have come in are very sophisticated. So now I will receive referrals from really good, very large, sometimes even white shoe firms that have been around for decades, because maybe internally they won't deal with it because of client conflict, reputational risk, political risk, whatever the case may be, but they will treat us with a good amount of respect. They're happy that we're there to take on something very complicated for maybe a legacy client who, for better or worse, is going to go down the rabbit hole. And again, that happens a lot with these ancillary businesses, even sometimes with big alcohol, big tobacco, big pharma. If they are kind of floating around the edge on some legal R&D, their usual law firms are not even going to dip their toe in that arena. So they come to people like.
Now, attorneys are licensed by state bars, but is your law license in any way at risk because you are dealing with something that's federally illegal? Or is it sort of like you're advising clients what the law is, in the same way that if someone comes in and says, thinking about murdering someone, could you tell me what the law is? And you say, well, that's against the law. You're not really involved in the commission of a crime. You're just advising people as to what the law is. Where does that fall when it comes to cannabis?
Well, you've hit the nail on the head, and each state is different. And yes, it is a state bar. There is no federal bar, and each state has prioritized this differently. I haven't seen a state yet just go after a practitioner merely just for practicing in the area, meaning advising clients. I haven't seen that, but I have seen states where when they really get into the nitty-gritty of the issue, because all of these state ethics rules pretty much mirror the ABA model rules, and that's the American Bar Association. And typically what you'll see is some line that says, thou shalt not assist the client knowingly in the commission of a crime. But there's a difference between assist and advise. And that is the difference when the lawyer, and again, depends on the state. If the lawyer is just telling someone the state of the law, if I just tell you how to get a retail cannabis license in the state of California, California to date has said, look, that's fine, that's assistance, we have no issue with that. But if I go and I form your company to undertake the drug trafficking, or I do your contracts to ensure that you can engage in drug trafficking, certain states have said that is unlawful assistance, and that is the equivalent of helping someone hide the body, which you cannot do. You may not be able to reveal where the body is, but you violated the ethics rules by assisting your client in the commission of a crime knowingly. So again, certain states have a different degree of what unethical assistance actually means. And in states like, for example, Maine, they've basically said, look, you file the articles of incorporation, you even pick up the pen to do their contracts, that's unlawful assistance. You can tell them what the law is, but you can't help them realize the fruits of the law, namely securing a license, running the business. And other states have gone in the completely different direction because they want legal practitioners in the mix, helping these people, clarifying things, and making life, generally easier.
One thing I wanted to touch on at the more micro level is this issue of bank accounts. It seems to me that the difficulty of obtaining bank accounts and sometimes even merchant services so that one can receive payment at a cannabis business via credit card in the sort of normal way that businesses do, seems to be sort of a vicious circle or create a self-fulfilling prophecy where by virtue of having to accept payment exclusively in cash and doing something with that cash and securing that cash becomes an expense, but also a liability because you're making yourself a target, for example, for theft or being burglarized. It seems that it actually furthers making the business appear to be an unsavory, not above board business, which then will only make it more difficult for legalization to sort of continue. Can you talk a little bit about whether in the last year there have been changes to being able to get bank accounts if you're in the cannabis industry and sort of how you're helping clients with that?
Yes, and let's get right down to it. The all cash business, yes, you've nailed it again. It is at its core a public safety hazard. It's very clear that if you're an all cash business, you are a succinct target for true, real criminal elements, and people can be put in mortal danger. On the legal side, the problem is because cannabis is a Schedule I controlled substance, meaning it has no recognized medical value, it's a dangerous drug, it is illegal, you cannot get bank accounts because transacting in the cash derived from that business is going to be money laundering that violates the Bank Secrecy Act. That is why, on the whole, banks do not participate. Of course, they too are afraid of aiding and abetting and conspiring to violate the Controlled Substances Act by keeping this cash on hand, but really, it's their own personal civil liability under the BSA for violations that pertain to money laundering. That is really the issue at its core. That's not going to change unless and until cannabis is decriminalized or descheduled or legalized at the federal level, which to me is probably a ways off, given the fact that Congress is so partisan right now over many issues. I don't see that happening in the near future. I digress. You asked me, has there been, kind of any light at the end of the tunnel? Because this is self-defeating. How can you have progressive legalization and normalization if you can't bank the cash? Well, in 2014, on the heels of that memo that was rescinded by Sessions, that was adopted during the Obama administration, and it's called the Cole memo because Cole is the name of the U.S. Deputy Attorney General who authored it. On the heels of that memo, the Department of Treasury, and specifically the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, issued its own guidance recognizing the public safety hazard here and the fact that generating cash and having nowhere to bank it could actually drive it back underground, which is what we don't want, issued its own guidelines to financial institutions, actually. So this is not for the benefit of, other federal enforcement officers. This was for the benefit of banks and credit unions on how to bank the industry. Now, I said before, Sessions rescinded all DOJ guidance on cannabis enforcement. The FinCEN guidelines, though, are still alive today. And the new Secretary of Treasury, Steve Mnuchin, under Trump, has opined, given testimony, and said, we know this is an issue that we want to solve. We will be providing further guidance because they understand at the end of the day that all of this revenue that's being generated, it's not just problematic for the entrepreneurs. There's a lot of tax revenue here, and states have bank accounts. And when the states take the tax revenue and put it in their bank accounts, they too are engaged in money laundering. So these financial institutions need cover. It also highlights the absurdity of these laws in that we have them, people are violating them left and right, including state governments, yet we can't get a change in the law. So I do think on the financial side, and I should mention, your ability to get a bank account hinges almost exclusively on how tough your state is relative to its licensing regulations. So if your state's a mess or it's murky, you're not going to see a lot of banks or credit unions participating. But in certain states that are very hardcore, like Nevada, Oregon, Illinois, Washington, you're going to see financial institutions participating. So I do think we're going to get more clarity. It's not going to be in the form of a change to federal law. Nobody wants to touch banking regulations in that capacity. I think it will continue to take the form of these memos where Department of Treasury, FinCEN, communicates its priorities to these financial institutions. And who's going to fill the gap? It's going to be enterprising, bold, brave, little banks and credit unions. We already know the bigger banks don't want to deal with it. They don't need the business. But the smaller ones certainly, I think, are more than willing to take the risk if the state's regulations are tough enough.
We've been speaking with Hilary Bricken, who's an attorney at Harris Bricken, focusing on the state legal marijuana industry on the West Coast. Hilary, thanks so much for talking to me today.
Oh, you're very welcome.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Extremist Republican Senator Ted Cruz debated his Democratic challenger, Beto O'Rourke, last night. And hilariously, when he was asked a question about civility, he snapped at the moderator and told him to stop interrupting, which is not particularly civil, especially if you're being asked about civility. And we're going to play the audio for you, not the video, because I'll tell you why in a second. But I want to talk about civility a little bit. Civility is sort of like tribalism. It's become one of these phrases that is popular in American politics and is applied everywhere to the point of being totally meaningless. And we're actually going to do a piece on so-called tribalism pretty soon. Tribalism now is like the in vogue fad explanation for everything in politics. There's a whole movement of so-called analysts who will do supposedly fair and unbiased analyses of political events and issues, and they will say tribalism. Tribalism is the explanation for this conflict or for that conflict. And of course, tribalism is a factor in human lives, but it's become really trendy to talk about tribalism as if it explains every situation when in reality it doesn't. And it also doesn't propose any solutions, and we really need to be looking for solutions. So that's tribalism. Analogously, civility is similar. And you'll notice that after Donald Trump brought to politics everything from making fun of disabled reporters and ridiculing the parents of dead military service members to calling people horse-faced on Twitter and saying some women are simply too unattractive for him to have sexually assaulted them, there were people on the left who were understandably outraged. And then immediately the right starts talking about the importance of civility and tone. And it's basically meaningless at this point, especially when the people calling for civility defend the guy who did all the stuff that I just mentioned to you. So anyway, we get to yesterday's debate between Ted Cruz and Beto O'Rourke. And Cruz snaps in this completely uncivil way when he's asked about civility. And we're going to play audio only because I've mentioned before, professional sports leagues and local news stations are so aggressive with copyright on the internet. This debate was broadcast or sponsored by, or organized by local news. I believe that if we play the video, even though we would be within our fair use rights to do it, we're going to get slapped with copyright claims. So we're going to just use the audio.
It's unfortunate, too, because it's a national race. So people all across the country want to see this.
I agree.
But so it goes.
So it goes. So anyway, here's audio of the clip of this moment from the debate where Ted Cruz snapped while talking about being civil.
You are right that there is a loss of civility. There is an anger. There is a rage on the far left that is really frightening. You know, the images hold on, let me answer with it. Don't interrupt me, Jason. The images of a left-wing mob beating on the doors of the Supreme Court. That's not good for our country. We can disagree while treating each other with respect, while treating each other with civility.
Stop interrupting. Can't you see I'm up here irrationally slamming Democrats for being an uncivil mob? This is a microcosm of the entire civility politics sort of distraction. Here's another moment, by the way, when Ted Cruz simply decided that he deserves more time for no reason. Like there was a format to the debate where there were initial answers and rebuttals and a system. And Ted Cruz, even though everybody had already gotten their rebuttals, just unilaterally decided he deserves more time. And fortunately, the moderators said, no, everybody's already gotten all the time that they were allocated here.
Only one senator voted no, stood in the corner while everyone else was at the table. Ted Cruz has put his career above the interests and priorities of Texas. Time. Ted Cruz is for Ted Cruz.
That's your time. Thank you very much.
Hold on a second. Let me respond to that, please. Which is, I noticed Congressman O'Rourke said we need to support law enforcement. I think that's striking that he says that now in a debate, because his career has been one consistently of opposing law enforcement. Indeed, someone else who is here today is Detective Mike Helly, who leads the San Antonio Police Officers Association.
Senator,
Detective Helly has endorsed me. And I would note as well, 171 elected Texas sheriffs, including...
Thank you very much. We have to move on.
Hold on, I get a 60 seconds response.
Hold on, you have both agreed to this.
But we agreed we could have a 60 seconds. But we agreed on a 60-second rebuttal if necessary. And I want to make a point on law enforcement.
He claimed he supports.
He already finished his rebuttal. We have to move on to the next
You've already gotten that time. That's the best. So anyway, civility, that's the topic here. Civility in and of itself isn't anything, right? Being civil when the other side is advocating for the removal of social safety nets and the opening of the floodgates of even more destructive inequality, civility is what they arbitrarily want to focus on. And it's really important to understand that this civility meme is being used as a cudgel, okay? The right likes to say that the left uses identity politics as a cudgel to stop debate or to criticize people or to deplatform. That's exactly what the right does with this BS civility and politics stuff. There are times for civility, and there are times where civility is less relevant. In an ideal world, every political issue would be resolved in a civil way, sure. But is that at all realistic? Of course not. And it's a loser's game to allow the right to use so-called civility and tone as a cudgel, and that's exactly what they're doing here.
Well, in his defense, I think that Ted Cruz has been quite civil, because even after Trump called him Lion Ted over and over again, and called his wife ugly, and said that his dad murdered JFK, Ted Cruz came around, phone banks for Donald Trump, and now kisses his ass all the time.
Super civil.
You know, I don't think I would be able to do that, but apparently Ted Cruz can do that.
Ted Cruz can do it. Mitt Romney is doing it after the frog leg debacle, as we're now colloquially calling it. And I guess Beto O'Rourke was being criticized for calling Ted Cruz Lion Ted, because even though he's a Democrat, Trump came up with that and he opposed Trump. I haven't heard this, but it's probably a good thing that Ted Cruz hasn't been calling Beto Beta Beto, right? Because that's got some ring to it.
Well, I've heard Beto versus Beta, referring to Ted Cruz as the Beta, but we don't have to get into that stuff.
Here's what I think is important. Early voting starts Monday in Texas. October 22nd, Monday. You can start voting for Beto O'Rourke or someone else if that's what you want, but I would vote for Beto O'Rourke. Vote, vote, vote. Let me know that you're voting. Send your pictures of you early voting starting Monday in Texas. Here's an interesting story for economic context. It's really important when we talk about how much things cost in government, in politics, in society. It's important to consider what other things cost in government as well. So for example, like when we hear a proposal for Medicare for all, and we hear a dollar figure for what it would cost, those dollar figures are so huge that they can be meaningless to us. And it's sort of like thinking about a time duration of 1,000,000 years. How do we as humans conceive of the time duration 1,000,000 years? It's really difficult when you consider the lifespan of the average human. So when we compare Medicare, when we look at Medicare for all, we should also consider, well, what do we already spend on healthcare? What do we spend on the military? We need context in order to really understand the economic price tag that exists for programs. So when we talk about the cost of Obamacare or the cost of Trump's tariffs, it's useful to have analogies and other data. And there happens to be research from National Taxpayers Union Foundation, which points out that this latest round of Donald Trump's tariffs have made it so that the total increase in cost to Americans for Trump's tariffs are greater than the average per person taxes for Obamacare. Okay, the cost of the enacted tariffs before the additional tariffs that will start on January 1st of 2019 will be about $42 billion. The cost of the Affordable Care Act is going to be $34 billion next year. The tariffs will cost Americans more than Obamacare, which we were told is too expensive and we can't afford. This is what many people, including Trump, don't understand about tariffs. Trump talks about putting tariffs on other countries. The tariffs are paid for by the businesses importing for those countries. So when you say we are going to put a tariff on China for goods that they export to the United States, it's the businesses buying those goods here that actually pay for that. That means layoffs. That means moving manufacturing out of the U.S. That means finding ways to circumvent the law to avoid the tariffs. And since we're talking about tariffs, this is also a good time to talk about the trade deficit. Yesterday and earlier today, we talked about the budget deficit. Donald Trump successfully framed himself to his supporters as an expert on trade who knew how to fix it. And in doing so, Trump talked about how the trade deficit was too high. And trade deficit means when you import more than you export, you have a trade deficit. When you export more than you import, you have a trade surplus. Donald Trump has been messing with these tariffs for several months now. And lo and behold, the trade deficit has increased during this time to a 6-month high. Soybean shipments keep declining. Imports keep climbing, meaning not only are Trump's tariffs not working to reduce the trade deficit, but American companies are spending more money on foreign goods rather than redirecting that money domestically. If you are an economic nationalist, and most people are, like economic nationalism is mostly unquestioned among the left and right, although there are people in our audience who I know disagree. Economic nationalism means that you believe the economic policy of the U.S., for example, should be geared towards helping the U.S. and Americans and American companies. That's what Donald Trump claims to be doing, economic nationalism. The policy is failing by the standard of economic nationalism. And we know Trump comes from the business world. He's running America like a business. The problem is that many of Trump's businesses went bankrupt and the employees lost their jobs. If you're a supporter of the tariffs, and I know that there are people in the audience who are, please get in touch and tell me, when will the tariffs start having a positive impact? Because so far the tariffs are costing Americans money. And the trade deficit, which was, according to Donald Trump himself, one of the main statistics, pieces of data that justified this trade war, has been going in the opposite direction compared to what Donald Trump claimed would happen. So I want to hear from you. If you support the tariffs, when will they measurably start doing something good for Americans and for American businesses? Get in touch with me, including via our voicemail number, 219-2DAVID-P. That's where I want to go next. We do have that voicemail number available to you. Unlike live calls, which are at a specific time of day, you can call the voicemail number anytime you want. And many people do call it at very unusual times, which is fine.
You can even call the voicemail number at the time that we're taking live calls.
Yes.
But you can't call the live call number just at any time that you want to. That has to be a specific time of day.
Right. Make note of that, kids, in case you weren't sure about that. We got a voicemail, 219-2DAVID-P, and it is from the Eggman, and it is about how he confronts people who he sees littering out of their cars.
Hi, Dave. I really like the environment, and I do not like people that litter. When I'm behind a car that flicks a cigarette butt out of the window, it gets me really angry. Do you see this? Do you notice this? What do you do when you see this, okay? This is what I used to do. I used to say to people, hey, that's a nice car. Too bad it didn't come with ashtrays. Or I'd ask them, hey, do you have ashtrays in that car? The responses I get are completely ignoring me. It ranges from that to trying to threaten my life and throwing shit at my car trying to kill me. So I don't know what to do when I see somebody throw a cigarette butt out of the window of their car.
Yeah.
I want to shame them so they think twice next time, but sometimes they either don't care or they try to murder me. So I just look the other way. Shalom, brother. Glad you're back.
Yep, shalom. Yeah. One of the things that I am sort of hesitant to do is just confront random people in public, because you don't know who's liable to just go completely off the charts, off the rails, and attack you. But former producer Lewis does have the story of when he was walking from the nearest subway station to our studio, where he saw a couple of guys, one of whom threw like a Pepsi bottle or a Coke can or something like that, or maybe one of those like 64 ounces with a straw in them. And he went over to the guy and confronted him, and the guy actually ended up picking it up and carrying it with him and putting it in the nearest trash bin, which I would not do. I admit, I would not do that.
Yeah, apparently Lewis is a lot tougher than we are. I would just give him a dirty look and call it a day at that.
Yeah, I do have one story, which I wouldn't do this now, but when I had first gotten my license, I was driving on the Massachusetts Turnpike, I believe between exits 3 and 4, maybe 4 and 5 out in Western Mass, and someone pulled up. I was in the slow lane on the Pike, and someone came around me on the left side. It was two young girls, roughly my age, 17 at the time, something like that, pull in front of me, and then they throw one of those like 7-Eleven big soda cups with a straw out of the window, and it hits my windshield.
Oh, no.
And it was empty, but still, I said, I am going to retaliate. So I called the state police, and I said, the person in front of me just did this. They said, really? Where are you driving right now? And I said, I'm between exits 4 and 5. They said, you know what? We got a trooper right there. Don't follow them, but just stay on the highway, and let's see if we can get everybody together. The trooper pulled this brilliant move where he somehow appeared, got in between, behind the vehicle that had thrown the stuff, but in front of me, put on their flashers, made it clear that he was not only pulling over the people in front of me who had done the littering, but also wanting me to stop. So all 3 vehicles pull over to the side. Cop comes up to me. He says, what's going on? I said, they threw this cup. He said, really? That's littering on a federal highway. It's like a $500 fine. You can go on your way. I'm going to deal with them. And I remember, I wouldn't do this now. It was so vindictive, but I remember pulling out and just looking over and seeing these 2 girls sitting there miserable that somehow a state cop showed up and now they were getting a $500 ticket.
Well, that's a much better solution than starting a fight with a group of 17-year-old girls.
Yes.
I think you came away with flying colors.
Well, I was a beta soy boy at the time, so there was no way I was going to actually do the full confrontation. So instead, I called the cops, and that's it. I wouldn't do that now. I was, at the time, I thought that there was something cool about what I did.
Imagine getting fined like that for littering of all things.
Yeah.
That would ruin my week.
Listen, littering has huge externalities, and people should be fined for littering because it's causing a huge environmental problem. Anyway, I'm ready for the hate about that story. We've got a great bonus show for you today. Hope you'll join us, become a member or a patron to get instant access.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.